Since we have a good selection of DPSs at this stage, we naturally beg the question, who is the best DPS in Wuthering Waves right now? Let's discuss that today. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. I'd like to note that this video is going to be focusing on TOA specifically. This is because Whimpering Wastes asks for its very own specific set of teams, and that game mode generally values different qualities in a team as opposed to TOA, so we are solely looking at characters in that particular context. Alright, cool, let's go. I'd like to start things off with none other than everybody's favorite big cat acolyte. That's right, Phoebe's getting a spot on this list. Considering the insanely free-to-play nature of her teams, it's kind of absurd as to how much damage she outputs. This character has proven herself to be an extremely formidable unit so far, despite only having been out for a couple of weeks. Her damage output is absolutely within the S tier realm, and she excels in multiple different scenarios. She's able to handle the difficult boss content that we oftentimes find ourselves up against in TOA, while also being able to deal with AoE situations quite well due to the large radius of her DPS mode's enhanced heavy attack. In multi-wave, you do have to reapply Spectral Frazzle with Spectral Rover, but that seriously isn't asking for all that much. It's the same as having to reapply any other buff for another sort of team. There is almost no situation in TOA where you won't be able to use her well, barring Spectral resistant encounters. The brief enemy freeze that her skill cast offers is actually super convenient, especially if you're up against enemies that tend to move around very frantically. Her ease of use in general is stupidly high. Like, it is hard to mess up Phoebe gameplay once you initially get the hang of it. You'll just be trying to maintain Spectral Frazzle application consistently is all, which, considering how Spectral Rover's Forte circuit extends the duration of Frazzle on foes, yeah, that won't be hard to do. Also, in my personal experience, quick swapping with Changli is easy to get the hang of once you know the swap windows. Every time Phoebe does an enhanced heavy attack, you swap to Changli. This means that if you have the Phoenix Lady, you can easily free up Sanhua for other strong DPSs that might want to use her. Mortefi works too in freeing up Sanhua, which is important to note, considering that he's also a 4-star that has been on many banners at this stage. She's flexible in terms of team building in general, which makes her excellent when it comes to vigor management. She is glued to Spectral Rover, but I assume that we'll most likely get more Spectral Frazzle supports in the future that will allow him to be freed up again. Considering vigor management is quite important because you can only use Shorekeeper and Verena so many times, the fact that Phoebe is this strong with those two not being taken into consideration, yeah, that's genuinely worth a lot in the TOA. Her ability to fit so well on any account of such high accessibility easily makes her one of the best units for anybody that is currently struggling to clear TOA. Both Sanhua and Rover are free characters, with Mortefi and Changli being highly competent substitutes. She's already dealing amazing top-of-the-line damage, even with such cheap teammates. Considering that she's the first DOT-based DPS that we've ever gotten, her future is as bright as the light that she shoots forth from her scepter, because her performance can only improve from here. However, as strong as our lovely acolyte is, she cannot beat the great magistrate of Jinzhou herself, Jinshi. The situation is simple. She, too, has fantastic ease of use, and deals higher damage while being equally as easy to use. Her multi-wave awkwardness is a tad higher than Phoebe's, but once again, it's nothing that you can't easily manage. Her boss nuking abilities are genuinely ridiculous, and AoE situations are also easy peasy for her, no questions asked. She's able to hit higher damage ceilings than Phoebe too, which is another reason as to why the Magistrate edges out over the Acolyte in terms of performance. She is genuinely spectacular in every conceivable scenario. Despite having released all the way back in 1.1, she remains as being extremely strong and competitive even now in 2.1. She seriously lives up to her name as a Sentinel Resonator. I should mention that this placement assumes you're playing your Magistrate with Yinlin or Zhezhe, because if you're running a fully free-to-play team with Yuanwu, then Phoebe will actually end up being stronger, because her best installed team is already as free-to-play friendly as it gets, featuring two totally free characters. Yuanwu is free as well, but a completely free Jinshi team does less on the whole compared to a cost-free Phoebe team. There's also the fact that Ocean's Gift exists for the Acolyte, so you can actually consider Phoebe to be better if you're running free-to-play Jinshi. However, keep in mind that even with that being said, she'd still remain as a top 3 DPS in the entire game. Also, this doesn't mean that Phoebe is going to decimate Jinshi whenever we do eventually get upgrades to the Spectral Frazzle archetype, because even the Magistrate herself could still get very reasonable upgrades to your team core, such as getting a Spectral-flavored Zhezhe, seeing as many people have their silly painter occupied by none other than the esteemed Montelli Lady Carlotta, that it'd actually be quite a handy unit to get, thus making vigor management easier. So even the Magistrate herself could still very reasonably gain team and performance upgrades. If you're familiar with the rest of my content, then you're probably surprised that I didn't put Jinshi up at number 1. This is because of a very particular reason, which I will touch on in a moment. Before I delve into that, I'd like to shout out an honorable mention that didn't make it into this top 3, but is still a good enough DPS to the point where I wanted to give her some flowers too. That shout out would go to none other than everybody's favorite crazy lady Camellia. She doesn't quite reach the damage ceilings of the other 3 characters in this video, but she still is a very highly performing main DPS, so I felt like it'd be disingenuous to not talk about her at all. I do consider her to be at least a tier lower than the others if we assume S0 R1 investment. but she is scratching the surface of being an absolute all-star. She is one of the easiest characters to play in the entire game. Notice somewhat of a running theme throughout all of these DPSs? Okay, but seriously, this unit is almost insultingly easy to play. You hold down to spin. Wow. If you want to turn your head off to clear chambers, then you seriously aren't going to find a character with a simpler rotation than this. If you thought Phoebe or Jinchi were easy to play, then you really haven't seen anything yet. I cannot emphasize enough how this is the character to go for if you can't be bothered to actually play that day, especially when you consider that our best 4-star teammate is Sanhua, a character who has a very quick and intuitive rotation that pretty much anybody can understand. Roshia exists too, and she's not very difficult to operate either. Outside of being as hard to play as your average Gen 6 to 9 Pokemon game, Camellia's damage is highly formidable, her nukes are excellent, and she's able to handle boss scenarios with ease, while also maneuvering her way around AoE excellently. In fact, you're able to switch between her 2 different modes depending on which situation you find yourself in. White hair for single target, red hair for AoE. Though I should mention that sticking to a red hair spinny mode is also perfectly fine when fighting purely single target based content. She'll absolutely still perform for you. Using white hair mode does require a couple of extra steps, but it does get that extra single target performance out of her. With that being said, if you're fighting a super aggressive enemy such as Thundering Mephis, then staying in red hair mode or abusing white hair mode dodge counters is viable. All in all, she's very flexible when it comes to how you can play her depending on the TOA floor. Also, her high asteroids based investment is no joke. The only other character that benefits so much from sequence nodes would be Jinchi. Camellia is easily one of the best high investment characters in the entire game, so if you're looking for a unit who will benefit a lot from whaling, or saving over a long period of time, then the Crazy Lady should actually be high on your priority list. Though if you don't intend to go further than S0 or 1, then the order that I've stated these characters to be in so far still tracks just fine. She's a slight notch below the other 3, hence why she didn't make it onto the podium. However, her performance is definitely still something to be reckoned with. The average player is much more likely to make full use out of her than with any other character too. Definitely a great unit for sure, she certainly deserves a shout out. And finally, we come to who the current #1 best DPS in Wuthering Waves under TOA conditions is. That honor would go to none other than the esteemed Montelli Lady Carlotta. Okay, so why's my opinion changed? After all, I'm one of Jinchi's biggest glazers, and it wasn't long ago that I was crowning her with the title of Best DPS. Well, simple. Carlotta has always had more pure single target potential compared to Jinjo's Magistrate, whereas Jinchi is a better all-rounder. However, after Carlotta released, we've been getting more and more difficult single target based boss chambers in the TOA. The scenarios that we find ourselves in favor Carlotta more over Jinchi. It's as simple as that. If we return to all-rounders being preferable, then the Magistrates could easily snatch the crown again. It's honestly quite close between them. You could easily make a case as to why Jinchi is still the best DPS in the game, and it wouldn't be an absolutely asinine opinion. But as it stands, single target damage dealers are on top of TOA at the moment, therefore allowing Carlotta to thrive. Granted, we're once again assuming best in all teams here. Using her with Yang Yang or Sanhua is going to be a good chunk worse than using her with Joja, but you'll find that Carlotta still does pretty well for herself with very cheap teams. But if we provide this lady with the Silly Painter, then most bosses could only dream of standing a chance against her. Her nukes are ridiculously high. No other character in the game is capable of dealing single target damage as high as she can. Even if you're only playing her on a static mist, she's going to mow down chambers so fast to the point where it feels like nothing else in your account is going to feel like it comes even remotely close performance-wise. Her rotation, while it's not completely brainless like Camellia's, and has a few extra moving steps to it as opposed to Phoebe and Jinchi, isn't too overly complicated once you've gotten the hang of it. In fact, once you generally understand how it flows, it's actually quite difficult to mess up the flow of her rotations. So not exactly a smash your head on the keyboard type of character, but definitely not an overly complex unit too. She can also effectively quickswap with Changli during her skill and Forte heavy attack, which is really nice for vigor management. And ever since she came out, there hasn't been a TOA rotation in which she hasn't excelled in at least one of the towers. Now, the only thing is that if TOA ever becomes extremely AoE centric, then she's going to find herself falling off a bit. It's hard to completely kill her off because her damage potential is just that high, but one heavily AoE favored tower is all it takes for Crow to fizzle her out of the spotlight a bit. Yet with that being said, her damage is definitely worthy of being considered all-star tier, and content simply favors her a whole lot right now. So I think it's reasonable to refer to her as this game's current best DPS, with room for argument as to why Jinchi would claim that role instead. Though considering that Whimpering Wastes launched in 2.1, I doubt that they're going to pivot to a heavily AoE-centric TOA structure anytime soon. We already have an entirely different game mode for that sort of playstyle. I will say that essentially every limited main DPS character that has been released in Wuthering Waves is still viable. I'm genuinely impressed with how well balanced everything has been so far. Yes, the units I talked about in this video may indeed be the all-stars of this game's DPSing meta, but with that being said, we don't have any truly bad limited 5-star main DPSs. However, the roster of damage dealers that we're getting in Wuthering Waves is slowly expanding more and more. As time has gone on, we have indeed slowly started to see a more defined cast of all-stars. I'd say the choices for this list were all reasonable. But if you disagree, how so? Or do you agree with most of the takes presented here today? Let me know down below, I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, I have a ZZZ second channel. Head on over and subscribe if you're interested in some fun, silly ZZZ content. I'd also like to mention that I stream on Twitch. I stream once a week every week on Saturday, starting from 3 PM UK time. Come along so we can play Wuthering Waves, ZZ, and do some other fun stuff together. Hopefully this video was able to tell you who the top 3 best DPSs in Wuthering Waves are. This has been Juice, signing out, and Carlotta is actually the best because she's the coolest one out of all of them. Sorry folks, I don't make the rules, I just follow them.